All right, so I don't really know how I feel about Tattoo. I'm not really sure how I should feel about Tattoo, and I'm also incredibly confused about what exactly happened in Tattoo. So
just forget about it. It's not worth talking about. We can move on. Yeah,
I would like to, but we've never done that before in the history of Trekabout, and we're never going to. So I
figure we get one, and we are keeping this one that we just can completely ignore. And I wonder if we're ever going to use it. But yes, Tattoo is not bad enough that we need to use our nuclear option yet.
No, and that's what it really comes down to for me, is that I don't think this episode is bad. And until you get to the last montage about how Indians are actually aliens or something, I like the episode as a Chakotay episode about telling us about Chakotay.
Yes,
but
I needed to make a lot of double think in this episode because so we talked a couple weeks ago about how the advisor on Chakotay's character and the Native American lore aspects of it, how he turned out to be just a dude who read one book and saw a bunch of John Wayne movies and managed to con himself into a job. So in a way, all of the cultural stuff is science fiction / fantasy here, right? I mean, this is not we have to almost pretend that, I mean, this episode is a lot better if I pretend that Chakotay is an alien from another planet who, they have tribes that are similar to certain real-life Earth tribes, but they are different because none of this really has any basis in reality. And it is fine as that in an exploration of Chakotay's background and all of that.
And I would be okay with that, except for the fact that the rubber tree people that Chakotay and his father and their friends find on their expedition into the South American jungle appear to be aliens.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of thing where, I mean, you said you were a little confused on the plot. My understanding of the backstory is that you have, now we're going to have to accept the episode's face value statement that A, these people had no culture, but B, great respect for life. I mean, to me, that does suggest that they did have a culture. I mean, the aliens' description of that is a little condescending, but basically we have a
I will only say about that I think that in general the idea of Native American or Native cultures in general having a great respect for the land as some sort of strange virtue signaling I find objectionable. Now, do I find it offensive? I mean, I don't know. I'm not a Native American, I'm not a Native person, I'm not an Indian, so I'm not going to pretend to be offended on their behalf, but I do find it a little bit of a cliche, and I will leave it at that.
Well, again, keep in mind that the advisor on this was somebody who didn't know his shit, and so if this stuff does come off as cliche, that's the well he was drawing from. He wasn't drawing from actual scholarship and actual traditions, let's say.
I mean, I don't want to go down into a road of impugning the motives of the people that worked on Star Trek Voyager behind the scenes, but doesn't it in some respects seem to you like the only way that this man could have conned these people into thinking that this was actually a Native American culture and that he was actually some sort of Native expert had to do with the fact that these were a bunch of white people that didn't know anything about Native cultures. And so when this guy was telling them essentially all of the cliches about Native American culture that were actually true, they just kind of bought into it. Unthinkingly.
I mean, let's assume that this guy is a really good showman. Like, he goes and he's able to speak very well and charismatically about, well, here, and we could have the rubber tree people, and this could be, I mean, maybe they...
Yes, but if someone came to me and said that they were an expert on French culture, and they said that all French people walk around wearing berets, all the French men have mustaches, and they ride bikes with huge baguettes in them all the time, I would say you're full of shit.
Yeah, no, and I feel like you would have probably said that in 1990, whatever this year, what year, 798? What year are we at?
95.
95. Oh my God. Yeah, I feel like you probably would have said that in 1995, or in your 30s at the time. But It's very unthought. Yeah, it's not really. It smacks of laziness. It smacks of nobody thought to fact check a bunch of this stuff. They didn't give this to an intern and said, "Hey, just check the sources on this and make sure that this is lining up with reality." You don't,
right?
You don't need to be an expert to check a couple of things and see that. And maybe, I mean, I don't know if. Maybe I should have done some fact checking. I don't know if the rubber tree people are real, are based on an actual culture, or are just something made up, and could be to the effect of, well, we're going to create the rubber tree people, and they're grabbing, a half dozen spiritual practices from this tribe, this nation, this kind of a thing. I mean, that could have been the way they were creating this to be fictional, but sort of like a few different things. I don't know.
I mean, I just did a quick Google search for rubber tree people, and the only things that come up are Star Trek related. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the rubber tree people are not real. Now, I mean, aside from all that, I think the other level deep to this, of course, is the revelation that, I don't know, like, Native American culture was founded by aliens. Like,
well, this is, I mean, it's doing something similar to 2001 in that some kind of greater alien intelligence saw the potential for life on Earth and decided to elevate it, and whatever is fine, but it is a little condescending that they had to have their culture created and given to them. I mean, what happened?
Well, because
what happened in real life is that culture developed naturally from people eventually settling down and repeating certain practices and all of that. Again, how culture actually happened. Aliens did not come and give it to them.
Well, right, exactly. And I mean, I'm gonna extrapolate this out based on information that I have picked up over the years. I am not a Native American expert, nor do I claim to be, unlike the man that worked on Star Trek Voyager. But to me, what this really speaks to is the idea that Native peoples are better than Western industrialized people or whatever. They're more childlike,
better and worse at the same time. Better morally and spiritually. I mean, this is the noble savage archetype, right? That there is some kind of Rousseauian natural state that is more divine and pure, and how humans should be, and us with our intelligence and our books and our sciences, and we're really bad people. But does anybody ever look at the noble savage archetype and take the criticism of our own industrial society seriously? Anybody who reads one of...
I think people that go to Burning Man do. Fair. But, they're objectionable for other reasons that have nothing to do with that. Sorry if you go to Burning Man. But actually, I'm not sorry because you're horrible.
I've thought about going to Burning Man. No.
Well, this is the end of this podcast. Well, okay. And the other part of this that I think we need to grapple with for about 30 seconds is the fact that the aliens are literally white.
Yeah.
I mean, there are just so many layers upon layers once you start talking about this episode that just I'm more and more just I'm not even... Like I said, I'm not even offended. I'm just sort of like agog at this.
It feels like the kind of thing where if I am sure, I'm sure that somebody who saw this episode said something to the people who wrote this episode like, wait, really? And I'm sure the people and producers said, oh shit, I didn't even think of that. Which, like, it doesn't, it's problematic not in a deliberate or thought about or conscious way. It's just one of those. It's lazy. It is the kind of thing where if it's problematic, it's because they are subconsciously picking up on the problematic aspects of the larger culture and just parroting them, because every culture does have unspoken assumptions which do just come into their art, which is part of it. And we are seeing 20, maybe with the distance of 20 years later, maybe with the fact that you and I have very different philosophical and political ideas that maybe were going on at this point in the 90s. But I don't know.
I think that in general, I look at that. I mean, I think that part of that is true, certainly. And I think that there is a certain laziness to it, but at the same time, I think that in the writer's room of Voyager and amongst the production staff of Voyager when they were developing the show in 1993, 1994, that they had this Native American character and they wanted to... I think there was more of a recognition that it wasn't okay just to say, oh, he's a Navajo and he acts weird, right? Because they did go to the lengths of hiring a quote-unquote Native American expert. Now, of course, the man was not a Native American expert, but... It is the case that at least they were trying, and there was a recognition that you could not do what they were going to do in, say, 1965 with Gunsmoke and just have have a person who looked vaguely Indian play a vague type of Indian. You could not get away with that anymore. And so they did make the attempt. And I think that having this guy basically con them and having them do such a poor job at this, I think it's more of an indictment of the larger culture of America, I think, than of anybody on the writing staff of Voyager, because I guess at least they tried to do the right thing. And if they didn't realize that what this man was giving them was incredibly cliched, then I think that it's more to do with the fact that they just came up in a culture that does not respect or care about Native culture at all. Now, at the same time, maybe they should have gotten a second opinion from another Indian expert, but there's only so much time in the day, I guess.
Yeah, only so much money on the payroll and all that. Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing which feels very well-meaning, and you could tell, I think their heart was in the right place. This is Star Trek after all. They probably did come to it from the, who's had it bad? The Native Americans. Let's try and rectify that in the future, because don't you have this, Chakotay at one point does have this, yes, well, back in the day we used to take the land from them, but now that's not the case anymore, when literally the Maquis is introduced, when literally we have a Next Generation episode which is about the land being taken from the Native Americans as part of this Cardassian horrible treaty. I mean, that does seem a little naive.
And this was never made. This did not make it into the episode, but they did intend for Chakotay's people to be from that planet.
Okay,
which I think, in a kind of a way, makes it worse, because the native tribe that Chakotay appears to be a part of and the native tribe that was in that episode don't appear to be the same at all. But
so you have the Indian planet. That's a... Listen, Star Trek does the science fiction thing where there is a planet and everybody is the same, but even that is going a little too far for it.
Yeah. Now, leaving aside all of that, I think that it's a. I don't even know if this is a good Chakotay episode. I kind of struggle with it, because I'm not really sure. His journey in this episode seems also very, very cliche as well.
Yeah, I mean, Chakotay has a lot of complicated feelings towards his father. Right? When he was younger, he did not have the same cultural views as his dad. In fact, began to resent them. I mean, if it's a cliche that 16-year-old Chakotay, wants fast cars and, blonde women, and his dad wants, to go and be with his people, then, again, part of the culture, this is and an expert who is pulling from the cliches of things. And as he grows older and begins to drift away from his father, begins to realize what he's lost, and after his father passes away, he gets the tattoo to mark himself as part of his people. Assumingly, this is when Chakotay begins to really go into finding his spirit guide and all of the spiritual practices that we see him in having in the series. And it's also when he decides to join the Maquis. We finally get an answer for why did Chakotay, who loves Starfleet, who is very much a Federation guy, decide to join the Maquis. Well, the answer is because he was taking up his father's cause. I mean, this is a very interesting relationship with his dad, a very something that there is a lot of meat into. I like that the episode goes into this, but has Chakotay given us any indications of this previously?
No, but I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It's not really like Chakotay has sat down with Janeway and said, "Let's have a conversation about our parents." So
yeah, just as Janeway hasn't talked that much, for example, about Mark. They are, or Tuvok doesn't talk about his wife and family in every episode. So Chakotay is not going to talk about his dad, at the drop of a hat. That is fair.
Right, and I think that if the mystery of this symbol being on this alien planet, having it turn out to be the, I guess, descendants of the people that went to Earth to uplift the native peoples, they have a nice moment at the end of the episode. If it's a little bit of a coincidence, well, okay, I don't really care about that much. It is a television show after all.
Yeah,
but I do wonder about. I guess you're right. Like what we're supposed to get from this episode is the revelation that Chakotay was not always this spiritual person who was fighting against the Federation. He was someone who really wanted to live in the Federation. He was someone who wanted to go to Starfleet Academy. He really, I think it makes his character a little bit clearer because I think one of the things that I've always said about Chakotay on this podcast and something that I've always wondered about him is how easily he fell back into the Starfleet way of doing things. And if nothing else, if all the other problems that this episode has, at least it gives us an explanation for why that is.
Yes, it wasn't his own home per se that he was fighting for. He is honoring his father, and certainly he's in a place where that working in the Maquis makes no sense and where the really important goal is shipwide unity and getting home. So yeah, it now does make sense that he's willing to drop it because that's not where he was from in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that in general too, if daddy issues are kind of a lame reason for doing something or uprooting your entire life, I guess I'm not that concerned with it either. I think that it gives us about as good as explanation as any as to why Chakotay is the way he is.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I would even phrase it as daddy issues because it's not like he has angst about this. He seems to, at least by the point that we meet Chakotay, he has made his peace and he has figured his shit out and he's got, if we had met him 10 years before, sure, we would probably call them daddy issues at that point. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think so. Now, we haven't talked about the B plot. I don't know how much there is to say about it, but I guess we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it because it exists.
Well, yeah. This is Well, it's interesting that the Doctor maybe has dialed back a couple points on compassion for the purposes of this episode. He is a little bit more of a dick, a little more in line with his very early characterization, but the episode makes a point that is a point that I feel very connected to, in that one is able to understand other people's suffering if one has suffered himself. I mean, this is I've been saying for a while, like, I want Paul Ryan and his entire family to get malignant cancer because I want them to suffer, to feel the pain of actually what it is like to be really fucking sick and scared and all of that. I mean, it was interesting watching this episode because the Doctor is able to get that bit of insight. He is not able to be detached and just view it as something distant that's not actually hurting anybody because, what is pain? It doesn't really matter. He does begin to get a very visceral understanding of illness in this. I like Kess's quote-unquote prank and the way she actually enforces that on there. I guess that's about the most that there is for me to say about it.
I mean, I agree with you, but I also think it's nice that the Doctor is interested in becoming a better person. I think that's a very sort of Star Trek thing to be concerned with.
Well, but I think it's funny because at the beginning he does this experiment. He's not doing this to. I think it's funny because he doesn't say, "Oh, I'm doing this to understand." That is what ends up happening to him. He But he says he's doing this to show the rest of the crew that you can function when you're sick, and it's not a big deal. Like,
that's true.
He even goes about it in a very kind of Dickie Doctor way, which I think is hilarious. I mean, he is determined to learn the exact wrong lesson from this, and which in a way is part of why I admire Kess's decision to extend the illness, because she's like, no, you are learning the proper lesson from this, sir.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I kind of misread that. But I also think that, I mean, I don't know. I always find this B story kind of strange because it has absolutely no connection to Chakotay's story. And it also seems to be harkening back to a very old, I guess not that old, but a very TNG style of storytelling, which even Voyager hasn't really done. I mean, episodes have B plots rarely in this show so far, but they're at least somewhat connected to what's going on. Whereas this one is just like, hey, here's a wacky thing that the Doctor's doing this week. Which, okay, fine. I find the Doctor entertaining. I have no problem with this. But what I really like about this is, and I was thinking about this while watching this episode and then Cold Fire, is that Kes is actually, if not my favorite character on the show, she's one of them. I'm really liking her.
I will be very curious to talk about. I don't know when she leaves the show, but I mean, I'm thinking about when Denise Crosby left the show. She said it was because Tasha Yar wasn't given anything interesting to do, and the reason behind Gates McFadden's leaving the show is apparently shrouded in mystery. But certainly, Dr. Crusher in the first season was not a very interesting character. But Kes has a lot to do, and she has a lot of interesting things to do. And they are, again, the more that they get away from the Mary Sue-ness of her, and they start to go into how weird she is, because between the pregnancy episode and Cold Fire, Kes's body is a very weird and fascinating thing, let's say. I'm surprised
and also just that I think Kes is shaping up as you're right, like as they've gotten more comfortable with the actress, and I think as they've gotten more comfortable with getting away from her sort of elfin perfection that she had in the first few episodes of the show, she's become a much more interesting character. She's become much more dynamic. She's become much more interesting. She's funny. She's sardonic. She's warm when she needs to be. But I mean, I would like to be her friend. She seems like a nice person, but she also seems like she's probably fun to be with.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that is getting away from the Mary Sue-ness of the character. I mean, I don't really see that she has
you could make
many faults.
I think you can make a character that's just a good, nice, cool, fun person and not necessarily be a Mary Sue. Again, she was a little too good to be true in her first few episodes, but I think she's come into a much well-rounded character. And if she is a particularly great character in terms of how people like her, well, that's kind of okay. I can't dislike her, so it doesn't. In a way, it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, maybe the last thing to mention before we move on to Cold Fire is we get a mention of Captain Sulu in this episode in the flashbacks, and I don't know what sense that makes whatsoever, because even let's assume that Chakotay is 50. In those flashbacks, let's say he's 15, so we're talking about 35 years before this, which would have been like the mid 2330s. Sulu would be like extremely old at that point, so I don't know if he would still be an acting like an actual captain out in the world.
No, but the because they said Captain Sulu sponsored his admission to the academy, and so I mean the implication it is possible that Sulu himself had maybe retired and yet knew. Somehow, I guess my question is, even if he had retired, how does Chakotay know him? But
right, that was my other question.
Again, it doesn't seem like, Sulu was my teacher, he was my mentor. No, he was the guy.
Well, Chakotay was a big fan of the original series, as we all were. So
he got. We see a naked Chakotay, and I can certainly see why George Takei would be interested in.
Sadly enough, I do have to disabuse you of that a little bit. That was not actually Robert Beltran. That was a body double.
Well, the point is, assuming it was a good body double, but the point is, Sulu wrote the letter of recommendation and talked to a couple of people he knew. That was his role in getting Chakotay into the academy. Maybe, he helped him out with a couple classes and things, but he wasn't an active, he doesn't necessarily need to be an active captain anymore for that too.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Well, I lied. There's one other thing. We would also be remiss if we did not mention briefly that Neelix and Tuvok both like to breed orchids, and so they are going to get gay married and live happily ever after at some point in the near future. I
know we joked a lot about Tuvok before going into this, and no, he's not my favorite character, but I really like the way Tim Russ plays him because I don't know, during that scene when Neelix is basically, we both do orchids, let's have orchid fun together, we can, discuss tips. Tim Russ very deliberately refuses to have a reaction to this, and you know exactly what his reaction that he's refusing to have is. Again, I love the fact that he is playing... he is not playing Tuvok as emotionless. He has a lot of emotions that he is refusing to show, and it is very obvious what they are, and I love that.
I think that's a good place to leave Tattoo. Let's move on to Cold Fire.
Now, you see, this is a strange placement for this episode because this does feel like a season finale in a lot of ways. It's a big episode in terms of, I have no idea whether we will meet Suspiria again, whether we will meet any of the Nasine again. It doesn't matter. Either way, this is a major beat from the pilot episode, and it is also a major development in Kes and her story and what she really is, and her psychic powers. Again, for it to just be a random in the middle of the season episode felt a little strange to me.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that in general, I mean, I had mentioned before that because you had this whole theory about how the search for the second caretaker was going to be like the arc of the series, and I wanted to disabuse you of that notion. And I knew this episode was coming fairly early in the show's run as well. I mean, this is only the 10th episode of the second season, so we're not talking about a very long time here. What I find so interesting about this in general is that one of the things that they always said was they put the idea of the second caretaker in the pilot because they wanted to have an out, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to have a way for Voyager to get back to the Alpha Quadrant and go zipping around dealing with Romulans and Klingons again if the ratings were not supporting this concept. And so putting this episode so early in the show's run and essentially getting rid of that idea, getting rid of the out, indicates to me that they were maybe comfortable with the show at this point, comfortable with the concept, and they felt like they didn't need to save that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they do...
Because I think that this is a really strong episode for Cass, and the idea of them finding the second caretaker with a bunch of Ocampa, and having that be the impetus for Cass to develop her telekinetic abilities a little more, I think is a better use of the second caretaker, frankly.
They do still leave the door open a crack. Suspiria is not killed or anything. She leaves. She has... I mean, if it tanked and they really wanted to do that, they could meet Suspiria again, and she's been shaken by, but you showed me mercy, why would you do that? And finally they can finish converting her over to understanding the Federation. I mean, that could be a thing, right? But... I have no idea if they will or not. It doesn't matter. But yeah, it's but you are right. It's used to a better purpose because they are, while certainly there is more they could do with the Delta Quadrant and all of that, I think they are getting what mileage they can out of. It's going to, frankly, should we have a generation ship and maybe, what do we need to do about that, and what is, if we really are going to be here 75 years, is a much more interesting major arc for the story than simply, well, we've got to find someone to take us home, and we might.
Right, we've got to find this MacGuffin alien and get us home as quickly as possible. I think that's right. And the caretaker, I think, is the least interesting part of this episode.
Yeah.
I don't, frankly, I don't know, and frankly, I don't care why she brought all these Ocampa and had like a second space station. I don't know why she's kind of. I don't even know what the term is necessarily, because I don't want to use the term evil or crazy or anything loaded like that. But
she is somebody who appreciates and understands power, right? I think the caretaker is so the caretaker creates or has this colony of Ocampa, and there are certain limits to the Ocampa. They only live 9 years. They don't have any psychic abilities, etc., etc., etc. Suspiria is somebody who wants these things taken to their limit just because they can. In other words, she wants the Ocampa to develop their psychic abilities, because why wouldn't you? You have this
right.
thing, exercises it. Whereas the initial caretaker maybe is seeing the danger that we find out in this episode from where this can go. Again, Kess, only a few days into lessons, is burning down things left and right, is almost killing people. So give her a few more years of study. That could be power that is too dangerous. The caretaker could have some legitimate reasons for limiting this stuff. Suspiria seems like the kind of god who is not interested in giving a little Edenic thing for paradise, and you live 9 years and they're all very happy and peaceful, and then you expire quietly in your sleep. Suspiria kind of wants the worshippers and the power and the exciting and the drama, right? I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I guess the other part of that as well, of course, is the caretaker. Well, Suspiria was the caretaker's mate. Now, we don't know what the caretaker's name was.
Yeah.
I don't think so. We kind of have to leave that aside, but I guess maybe what you're supposed to think is that the second caretaker, Suspiria, their relationship ended not because of any inherent reasons in the relationship, but maybe because Suspiria had different ideas about how to best save the Ocampa.
I mean, listen, the fact that she's named Suspiria is so fucking on the nose, but
yeah.
I'm surprised the episode didn't full on name her Lilith, right? I mean, that's the archetype for her in my head.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that I don't know, because what is she really doing though? Because she has helped the Ocampa. They do say that they've been there a really long time, so she's letting them. She's engaging in them on some level. She's doing these genetic experiments, coming up with these medical treatments so that the Ocampa can live longer. And she's also helping them develop their mental abilities more. But then she also lives on this like other plane, and what's his name, Talus, and the other Ocampa don't really know where she is most of the time. So it seems kind of nebulous about how much exactly she's involved in their lives anymore. It seemed to me that fundamentally what this might come down to is the caretaker from the pilot of Voyager was very focused on the idea of the Ocampa as helpless and needing protection, whereas Suspiria perhaps felt or thought that the best way forward for the Ocampa after the disaster that they had caused was to give the Ocampa the ability to take care of themselves.
I mean, she is unquestionably an antagonist in this episode, but in a lot of ways she's not. Again, you're right, she's not evil, and she's not necessarily wrong. I mean,
no.
So when they first meet Talus, that's his name.
Talcum powder, yeah.
Talcum powder. And he says Voyager's known in this quadrant as a ship of death. And what does he point out as the reasons that it has? I mean, based on him, it's almost as if people speak of Voyager as a cursed ship of doom. And the points that he mentions, well, you killed the caretaker, you started a war with the Kazon, and you're raiding planets for the resources. Now, this is the most unfair light to look upon all of these. The caretaker died as they happened to get there. The Kazon, that was inadvertent, and that's largely the Kazon's fault. And the resources, they've never plundered. They've negotiated. They've made deals and all of that. But from Suspiria's point of view, her, whatever the breach between her and the caretaker was, she did at one point love him, and from her view, these people came and then he died, so she can put two and two together. They're at war with the Kazon. They must have done something really bad to piss him off. They're taking resources from planets. That can't be completely, who would agree to give these people a thing? So she is not wrong for being frankly terrified of Voyager and wanting revenge on them. And again, it's another reason why they are so vulnerable in the Delta Quadrant. If Voyager was in the Alpha Quadrant and somebody had these exact problems with them, number one, they would have the reputation of the Federation behind them to say, well, maybe we should look and see, give them the benefit of the doubt. And if not, the Federation has plenty of lawyers who are going to help argue that case. And if Voyager is indeed found to be guilty of these things, it's going to be dealt with. They don't have any of these assurances in the Delta Quadrant. They don't know. Funny enough, mentioning Lilith, they don't know Voyager from Adam.
Right, yeah. Well, I know. I think that's all really true, but I think you can take that even further, because what that makes me think of, or what that makes me sort of realize, is that in a weird way, the Delta Quadrant species are kind of the inverse of what we expect from Star Trek, because we've always talked about how the Federation approaches everyone in good faith. They don't lie. There's really no sort of subterfuge a lot of the time, aside from like the Romulans, maybe, right? And that has been the case time and time again, that the people coming together in good faith can come to some sort of resolution that is beneficial to both parties, and that the Delta Quadrant is not that. And so what you have in the Delta Quadrant is a bunch of species running around that are not acting in good faith, and that are, in a sense, they're having the exact opposite interpretation of Voyager's actions, only because that is the environment in which they live.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Everybody is very suspicious. Voyager rarely leaves getting what it wants, and usually the best it can hope for is something like the end of this episode, where the antagonist realizes, okay, maybe Voyager isn't going to outright murder me, so we're all just how many Voyager episodes end with both sides just backing away and, all right, we escaped unscathed, let's be grateful for that. I mean,
well, because I think if you think about a lot of the episodes, I'm not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with Suspiria's. I am disagreeing with Suspiria and Talus's interpretation of these events. Voyager is not a ship of death.
We've seen the events as they were happening. We know exactly how the caretaker died. Suspiria doesn't.
Right. But if you think about the alien species that Voyager has acted in a sense, the standard Star Trek way of good faith, and in saying, hey, you know what, maybe we're not doing this the right way, or maybe we're misinterpreting their actions, we're going to back off. Like, most of those species were either non-sentient or non-verbal or non-communicative. They were sort of like these space. Yeah. There's been a lot of space living organisms that the ship has been encountering so far. Yeah. That's been happening a lot. And if you think about the alien species that they have encountered, like the Nasine, the caretaker, the Ocampa, the Kazon, the Vidians, the ones from Prime Factors, the ones from Time and Again, who don't even know they exist because they hit the reset button at the end of that episode. But for the most part, the Vidians are assholes that are not acting in good faith because I guess they are in a sense, because they're honest about what they're trying to do. The Kazon don't know what they're trying to do. The one in Prime Factors were lying to them. So the only alien species that could really vouch for the crew of Voyager's good intentions are ones in which nobody can talk to.
Yeah. They're more like animals in a way.
Right. And I think that my dog thinks I'm a good person, but I don't know that he could vouch for me in a court of law.
Yeah.
Well, so leaving that aside, then we should grapple with Talus and Kes, because this is a pretty good episode for Kes.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that you had talked about how, okay, is the show ever going to remember that Kes has mental abilities?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, yeah, they will. It's kind of all over the place, but they'll get there. And obviously it came up a little bit in not Tattoo, but in another one, I forget which episode, and then it comes up again in this episode. And it is the case where I think this is, again, a little bit of an older style of Star Trek storytelling. We did just come off DS9.
Yeah.
They're going to bring up stuff that they're not going to thread it through episodes because that's not what this show is doing. But I do like the fact that they established that Kes has been working with Tuvok to develop her telepathic abilities, and that things have not been going great because Kes is not a Vulcan, and Vulcans are not necessarily the best teachers. I also like the fact that Tuvok being a little bit of an impatient bad teacher is something that's continuing throughout the show. We first saw that in Learning Curve.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this is reminding me of Harry Potter and Snape teaching occlumency, but you have this dichotomy between talcum powder and Tuvok, where Tuvok is stressing the discipline aspects of it, right? He is a Vulcan.
Right.
He is a Vulcan, and the Vulcan backstory is that we had all of these emotions that were destroying us, and we learned how to repress / control / discipline / them, and talcum powder is saying, no, you have this power, use it, let it out, just go and, strengthen it. And this is Tuvok seems to completely understand that Kes is going to be overwhelmed by her powers and needs to discipline them because that's how he lives his life. And this episode does suggest that discipline is the proper way, because when she is letting the full reign of her powers go before she's quite ready to master them, bad things are happening.
Yeah, bad things are happening, like gruesome.
Yeah, and even further things are implied to be on the horizon, because does Talcum keep saying stuff like, you're going to transcend all of these people, you're going to be so much beyond them once you... These are not good things. This is not the life that Kes wants for herself. Kes wants to be around her friends and loved ones. She is somebody who enjoys being on this ship and being part of this crew and having her work and stuff. She doesn't want to transcend all of this and do whatever she can because she can.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, because there's two parts to it as well, I think. There's the part which is extending the Ocampa's natural lifespan. Talos is 14 years old. That is obviously, what is that? 50% older than any Ocampa that Kes has ever known before. And then the other, and that doesn't seem to be much of a problem to me. I mean,
no.
in the Star Trek universe, humans live to be 150 years old, so whatever, it's fine. That is not something that I necessarily have a problem with. But the other part of that, of course, is that for Kes, her mental abilities are something that were sort of, you had said earlier that the Ocampa did not have the mental abilities, and I think I recall that Kes said something when they first surfaced in Time and Again that there were stories amongst her people that the Ocampa used to have these sort of mental abilities, and they were very ill-defined at that point. Obviously, she was sort of hearing things from people that were dead or hadn't existed or whatever, and now it's just more like straight-up telepathy. Until we get to the telekinesis and things like that. But
on the other hand, you can certainly see that would be where Tuvok would go with it first, because in terms of physical harm you can do to the world, telepathy is going to cause a lot less damage, especially with somebody like Kes, who has shown to have discretion and responsibility. Something like telekinesis, which, learning how to boil something and create heat wherever you want it to is something that, if you're not fully ready for it, as we see, can go very awry. And so I think he is starting small, baby steps. Just listen to what your boyfriend is thinking while he gets a haircut. And then maybe you can, maybe in a month you can say something to another person, and maybe in another year you can, and 5 years from now we can start. Oh wait, you're an Ocampa, so you're dead. Never mind. Like that. And you could certainly see a desire to do all of this very quickly with a 9-year or even a 14-year lifespan. The feeling that there is so much more, this art's so long, this life's so short with one's psychic abilities, and go and do everything you can because you have such a short time. You might as well learn how to do everything in your brief time here.
Yeah. Well, I also think, this just might be me spinning my wheels a little bit, but I do think that there is something to be said for the idea that for the Ocampa, the challenge of life is not in learning things necessarily, because it seems like they all have eidetic memories.
Yeah.
It's more, it makes sense that they have these additional mental abilities, because that is going to be the thing that challenges them in life, perhaps. And part of the reason why the Ocampa that Kes come from seems so lost is because they have really, they don't know what they're living for, because they don't have these mental abilities, and so they're not challenged in any way to learn how to use them. You can't really, you can't study to run a marathon. You need to train for a long time. There's no way to intellectualize that experience in the same way that it doesn't seem like there's a way to intellectualize learning telepathy or telekinesis.
Yeah, we're I'm not sure if you would say that the Ocampa in general are lost, because from what we've heard of Kes talking about it, everybody seems to have these very gentle, simple lives, right? You mate for life, you have your child at the age of 4, there's this bonding ceremony with parent and child. It's a very peaceful, cyclical existence. Kes herself is somebody who wants more than that, and she goes on to Voyager because she wants more than that. She is probably not the only Ocampa who feels that way. Maybe there have been others who have left, but it does seem like generally, for most of the Ocampa, life is pretty okay. The caretaker provides everything. They have their home. It's perfectly designed for them, and they have their generational continuity. Now, with the caretaker dead, I don't know how apocalyptic things are getting back at home, and I would imagine they're probably it's about a year later, they're probably beginning to get very terrible, but I don't know.
Maybe they should all live on the Ocampa space station.
That would be a thing.
Well, yeah, I think so. And the one thing that I do wonder though is, what does this episode tell us about Kes though? Because it certainly indicates to me that Kes, like you said, she wanted more out of life, and that's why she left Voyager. She is different from a lot of other Ocampa in that she is dating someone of a different species.
Yeah.
She wants to be challenged in many different ways, and I think initially the idea of living on the space station with Talos and the other a telekinetic Ocampa was appealing to her because it would be challenging. But as she started to see what it would really mean, and also the fact that they did seem to be a bit small-minded.
Yeah, well, they certainly love being Ocampa, don't they? There was
right.
There's the. We'll talk properly about Neelix's jealousy issues in a second, but the point when she's saying, if I go on the station, would you live with me? There's no fucking way they would let Neelix be on that station, is there? He would have a horrible time.
No, they don't seem to want anybody to go on the station.
Yeah, they don't even want to get communication. They have to. It is Kes is the only reason they even respond to their hails, really.
Well, they certainly. They respond to their hails, but
yeah.
They don't immediately hang up the phone when they see Kes. I think that's right. Well, let's talk about Neelix then, because that's really the last thing we have to grapple with in this episode. And I think that Neelix has seemingly come to terms with his jealousy.
There is a little. There's a moment when he is a little sad when he realizes Kes is invited to this place with her people and she's going to learn so much, and of course she would want to go there. And again, he does certainly understand that he is going to lose her, but he is relatively quickly able to get into a, I'm happy for you, and if you want to go live on there. And they do again, the fact that she very quickly says, I'd want you to live with me, I think does affirm that thing that he finally realized the other week, which is that, she's made her choice. She wants to be with Neelix. She is, it doesn't matter that there's all these that Tom Paris is flashier. She's made her choice. And so, Kes does, I think it's interesting that Kes is trying to have the best of both worlds with this. All right, I could live with the Ocampa and learn so much and still have my boyfriend who I love.
Yeah, well, and I think that maybe that's the last thing to say is that it's a little. It does, Kes is still young, and obviously she's still learning, and it's a little bit naive for her to think that she can have her cake and eat it too. That she wants she wants Neelix to go live on the space station with her, I think is very, very touching.
Yeah.
But it's probably not realistic. And it also may be the case that she doesn't realize it's not realistic, partially because of her experiences on Voyager. Because here's a ship of all kinds of different species that when Neelix and Kes wanted to come, they were like, all right, sure, come on, let's go. So she's not really aware of more insular cultures in a certain sense, even though she is kind of the product of one.
But yeah, in both in the Ocampa home world, she didn't feel in place there, but they wanted her there. They made a home for her, and it was home for the first year and a half of her life. And if she were to show back up on their doorstep, she would be welcomed back instantly. And her entirety of life has been people welcoming and loving her. And so it is that kind of, she's had it so good that she doesn't necessarily understand sometimes that people have it bad.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And yet, it's in her discussions with the Doctor, she does have a remarkable reserve of empathy and love for people, so.
Well, she's a Mary Sue.
Yeah. I do have a fan theory, though, because during the Suspiria scenes when she's talking with the adult voice, that's Baylock's gimmick. I think Baylock is in the scene.
Well, it's certainly possible. I'll go with it. I'll say yes. I agree with you.
Yay!
All right, well, I think that's it for Tattoo and Cold Fire. If you have any thoughts on either of these episodes, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast, why don't you, at Trekaboutshow.com. You can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Trekaboutshow, which also supports our other podcast, Tuning In. In 2 days, we are releasing our episode on the X-Files episodes, very important episodes, not to sound like Trump, Dwayne Barry and Ascension. So do go to patreon.com/TrekAboutShow and also go to tuninginshow.com. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we are there. Trekabout Show is our username in all those social media platforms. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review. We have a new review.
I didn't know this.
I know you didn't, but you know now. So this comes to us from Podcast Junkie 7, who says, no recap, summary, or ads, just sober, deep analysis from unique perspectives that honor the Star Trek world. Well, thank you very much for that review.
And if you like more reviews, you can learn Juicy brand orange juice, which is the best juice in the world. Right, Eric?
Would you like to sleep better? We all would. Why don't you check out a Casper mattress? See, Richard doesn't listen to podcasts, so he doesn't know any of the companies that actually advertise on podcasts, but I know all of them because I listen to a lot of podcasts.
I mean, Mark Maron does that coffee.
Yeah, but that was a long time ago, and you're not listening to WTF anymore, are you?
I haven't been in a while. That's really the only podcast I ever listened to for a little while. I mean, really, here's the thing. Who wants to hear two assholes talking for an hour?
Apparently a lot of people do. I don't know. All right, well, thank you very much, Podcast Junkie 7, for that review. It is appreciated. And if you would like to be as cool and wonderful as him or her or whatever their preferred gender pronoun is, we've been talking for a while, and it's time for my dinner. Please do go to iTunes and leave us a review. Next week, we are going to be talking about the Star Trek Voyager episode. Surprise, surprise. That is not the name of the episode.
Oh, that would be great.
Maneuvers and Resistance. It's about Pilates.